Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline with Climate Interactive. Thank you so much for joining us for the 7th session of the Mastering En-ROADS training series. We're so excited to have you guys here today. And with further ado, I'll pass it over to Drew Jones, who will be facilitating the session. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Caroline. Welcome, everybody. Number 7. You guys have hung in there through all of these sessions. Along the way, if you have questions, please write it into your questions box. We have a Caroline and Janet Tchaikovsky and others on the team. I think Ellie is there. So if you have questions, right away. And this topic, okay, this is the cutting edge of our thinking. I think this is the topic. This is the topic that wakes me up at 5:30 in the morning. How to create the context and conversation that leads other people to take action, to take effective action on addressing climate, equity, and justice. It's what has not been written down and documented really well, and particularly how to use simulators to create an experience so powerful that people go running out of your session, out into the world, and are able to make a difference at whatever domain they're in a business, in a community, in a state, in a country, in an NGO, in a sector, wherever you are. So this is going to be about advanced facilitation tips, helping people deliver on their dreams using simulators. And it's dedicated to my mentor, Dr. Dana Meadows. I met her when I was 20 years old and a student at Dartmouth College. The whole story of that is, well, actually, Caroline, if you could post it out there to everybody in that Creative Mornings talk I gave about meeting Dana and this carrier trash experience. She taught me a lot about how to use simulators. She built the model with a team called World 3 behind the limits to growth. And she was just a guide about how to bring your brain, your heart, your spirit to this work. So this is dedicated to her, and we're going to hear some of her words a little later. Here's where you are. You've made it all the way to number 7 of 8. What are you going to do? You're going to learn next week about confidence building, testing, model science. Thank you, everybody who posted, shared pictures. You did your homework. You showed the simulator to somebody else and took a picture of that experience and sent it to support at climateinteractive.org. Spoiler alert, that's what we're going to ask you to do again, is to share your experience with somebody else. Engage them in using En-ROADS. You're also part of a surge that's been happening over the last couple months and people engaging others with En-ROADS. The blue line that you see here is people working with C-ROADS. And that's our other game, World Climate, that you may have seen, which had really growing, starting in 2015 when Ellie Johnston initiated the World Climate Project and spread it around the world with many on our team. It's grown up to almost 70,000 people having played that game. Here we are with little old En-ROADS, which has been around for a long time. It used to be just a few of us engaging people, just a few hundred people, our students. And then this last year, you've been part of this surge as we finally delivered it in its new form and are training you and others to use it. Now 23,000 people have engaged with the simulator that we know of, facilitated by you and many others around the world. So this is where it's all been happening, and I would encourage you, put your event on the map. When you do engage people, go to the place on the website, put your event on the map. So the next thing that comes out of all this is for you to engage somebody, a friend, colleague, a leader of yours, maybe engage someone else to help you with it. Because in the first few times, what you're going to want to do is team up with somebody. Find someone who complements you. So you're both on Zoom, or you're both doing this if you're able to do it social distance in person. Find someone on the forum. You can go and Caroline, would you send everybody the link to go to the forum where you can see people who are offering to help around the world? Find an En-ROADS climate ambassador. Find someone on the forum to join you. Someone who may know parts of the model that you don't, or has a skill that you don't. Or invite us. We might be able to help you. Also send us an email if there's any way that we can support you in having you work with En-ROADS out in the world. We also have a communications kit And also, Caroline, can you pulled that together? Can you send the link there so that you can bring the media to sit in on your event and take pictures of the people meeting online, or just cover what you're doing? So these are some tips for the first few times. Get feedback, keep learning from participants, and definitely put your event on the map. Okay, what we're going to invite you to do after this is to become an ambassador. And that's going to be really important to get that designation, and we will end up sending people to you if you would like them to find you as a En-ROADS Climate Ambassador. All right, so let's roll up our sleeves. Here's the question. My other mentor and our work colleague here at Climate Interactive, Dr. John Sturman at MIT Sloan, said, research shows that showing people research doesn't work. You've heard me say this a lot. So the question then is, if showing people research doesn't work, what works? Write it in the question box. What actually works? What actually works to create a situation where someone is open to changing their mind, and changing their mind to the level that they're actually willing to take a different action, advocate for this policy, not that policy. Go talk to this person and say this to that person. Change their behavior and how they live their life or how they run their business. Write your answer. I'm really curious to see what you come up with. The general principle here is new information doesn't change people's minds. New experiences change people's minds. What kind of experience do they need to have? What are the qualities of that experience? So, Caroline, what are you seeing? What are people saying?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of great answers coming in, personal stories, relationships, letting people do their own experiments, engaging them in interactive activities.
Yes.
Giving people ownership, empowerment of change. Experiencing knowledge in a playful way.
Yes.
Showing them what a future looks like if action is taken versus it's not taken.
Absolutely.
Emotional engagement, personal encounters or experiences.
Wow, these are great. There are dozens coming in, Caroline. How are you reading all these? This is so great. Keep going.
Yeah, giving them something to play with, having them learn for themselves. Make it personal, refer to the audience in a local context.
Fantastic.
Building and demonstrating something that makes old ways of thinking irrelevant.
Fantastic. Great. So this is it. This is it. And so the question then is, if we want to do all those things, how, in the context of the En-ROADS Climate Workshop, the Climate Action Simulation game, and the incorporation of multi-solving and the multi-solving framework within these experiences that we're developing, how do you do that? How do you do that? Well, the way you do that is you facilitate and engage people in excellence in several ways. First, I'm going to talk about some of the basics, and then we're going to take it up a notch to some of the top level tips from our experience and what we've learned from our mentors through the years that we learned to do any of this from. So here's just some basics, just to remind us of the simple things to make sure to do. Undersell the relevance of the simulator to the local geography. You're in the state, you're in a certain state or region. Don't say, this is going to tell us what to do in this state or region or community or business. You need to undersell that. It's going to help us. What are some of the trends? What are some of the global goals? What's high leverage and what's low leverage in a big picture? And you're saying our work is going then to be to interpret what that means for us here in our business, here in our neighborhood, here in our state, here in our country, here in our sector of the economy. You're going to have to translate it over, but also the key is undersell it. Peter Senge pulled me aside and said this, and you undersell it and you spend maybe even less time than you would otherwise. 45 minutes, play with the model, put it aside, then roll up your sleeves and say, now we're going to get busy here in our neighborhood or whatever. What'll happen is people will come back and say, wait, there were some principles there about how that system worked that seem relevant. Then they bring it back, but they're asking for it, as opposed to, this has all the answers. This model's amazing. It'll help you. It has all the answers. Undersell, undersell. Early on, because there are people who may challenge you, just boldly share some numbers that you've memorized from the model. It seems a little sneaky, maybe disingenuous. It works. PhD candidates in their defenses know to do that early on. Share that you know the numbers, and then you don't have to worry about them as much. Share numbers early on. Early on, demonstrate it's okay to be wrong and change your mind. You are asking people to change their minds. You need to model that behavior. So if someone says, oh, I don't know, your projector or your model, your screen isn't working quite right, or, oh, I know something else about renewable energy that you didn't, acknowledge it and demonstrate your openness and humility. You have to model that behavior if you're going to ask it of other people. Also early on, signal that multiple views are welcome. You're not here to be the police of the certain path that it's got to be of how we address climate change. And there's a right way and a wrong way. You're trying to have a broader conversation with people who disagree with you. So when you hear somebody propose something that you don't particularly like, don't shut it down right away. Acknowledge it. Like me, I don't like nuclear power. I don't think we should invest more in nuclear power. And when someone mentions it early on, which a lot of people do because I love engaging people who are more conservative and they love bringing that up, say, absolutely, here's what we simulated. Here's what the IAEA says about it. Learn a lot about these other things and welcome them into the conversation and trust the truth of the analysis to support the position that's best. Never go more than 10 minutes. Forget this 15. Never go more than 10 minutes in a workshop without moving the slider. The model is just way too cool. It's way too cool to hold off on that with blah, 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 blah talking. Move a slider, show how the colorful lines move early on, even if you're just saying, hey, look how cool this model is, boom, 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 then get back to talking. Show it early. Always, at least the first time you have a scenario, ask people to mentally simulate. They've got to do that. This is not an answer machine. It's not a crystal ball to tell them the answer, tell them if they're right or wrong. I'll get into more later about how our brains work, how we actually are open to changing our minds. It's going to be really important. I'll explain more later about this point. Okay, those are the basics. Next level, ground yourself in your goal. When you are running a workshop, if ever you're in doubt and you're like, did I hear someone say something, Caroline? No, we're good. If ever you're in doubt, if ever there's a moment of like, why am I here? Or you're stuck, ground yourself in why you're there. You are there to cultivate, encourage, support learning, where learning is building the capacity to take effective action. It's not intellectual learning like, oh, now I understand something about climate. No, it is, I understand something about this whole system of issues together that leads me to be able to act effectively. So it's not just do stuff, but it's do stuff that's high leverage. That's why you're there, is to cultivate their learning. Now you ask about when does that really happen? Often learning happens at these really subtle moments when it seems that a conversation is deepening, when you get to the point beyond the numbers and the gee whiz of the model to a place where you can see where folks are stuck. If it's a business, why have we been not actually reducing our carbon footprint in our business? Why have we not been able to change policy at the federal level or the state level? Why have we just been aiming low? I think we're stuck on X. And if you can use the workshop to get to where somebody is stuck and move through that, that's a beautiful thing. Find that moment if you can, when people are talking about what really matters. As you do it, you play 4 roles. The first role is the most important. You are a coach. When I say coach, I mean in the best sense of the athletic coach, professional coach, executive coach, somebody who is committed to seeing another person operate at their highest level, their most effective, achieving their dreams and goals. At the heart of it, it's just tapping into love. It's tapping into love. If you think of love as building, as investing in someone else's growth, believing in someone else, seeing their possibility. Right before we started this, we grounded ourselves in probably the most important thing before a webinar or any kind of training. Why am I here? We're here as your coach, as potential users of the simulator, seeing you using it to deliver upon your dreams. So think of your people in the workshop that way. That's why you're there. You're their coach. Now, you're also at times a professor, a teacher. You're going to have to explain stuff, but make sure that's secondary. Don't get too caught up in explaining stuff. Don't use it too much as this is my chance to talk about all I know about solar roadways or afforestation, whatever it is. Don't be professor too much. Be a coach. But you also need to be a playwright. The playwright idea is that when you design a workshop, there will be highs and there will be lows. There will be times when people are thinking a lot and feeling a lot. There are times when people feel good and bad. Think about the arc of how you'd like to create an experience for people. In particular, facing hard realities, building hope towards what the future that they really want to see is. You know, the 60 seconds of silence as a time for people to go within themselves. Think of yourself as creating an experience like a playwright creates a story and a play. The fourth one, at times you just get to put it all aside and be a fellow traveler. Like me, I'm just like you, someone concerned about the future who wants to make a difference however they can. And you may need to just speak honestly about what it feels like to be alive at this time, winning and losing, and advocating for the future that you really want. Like, oh, you know, we just got this simulator down to 2.5 degrees. I think we can do much better. You need to speak honestly sometimes. However, you want to avoid some of these other roles. Tech. You're not there to give them new software. Some people could think of it that way. Yeah, you have some software, but the point is not the model or the software. Don't get into this thing where that's what your point is as if you're just delivering software. In the same way, don't be an advocate for climate, for justice, and for equity. I just said it. It's counterintuitive, but pull back your voice in advocating for the results and see if you can make space for somebody else to find their voice on this topic. It's not shirking you speaking your truth. This is the role of facilitator. You make space. Don't take the stage. Give somebody else the chance to practice advocating for their dreams, advocating for their truth in some way. So when you feel that pull, someone says, oh, 2.7 is good enough, that's all we can really do. And you say, whoa, 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 that's bad. Hold back and see if you can say, well, does anybody else have something to say about that? Somebody might, for the first time in their life, stand up and speak up and find a voice they never knew they had. Don't be an advocate. See if you can get other people to do it. Now, push comes to shove, don't let, you may need to do it. Minimize your role as an advocate. Also, defender. You're going to need to defend the model and talk about why you have confidence in it, but don't get into that mode. See if you can avoid the confrontational mode that often these conversations can get in. Okay. If research shows that showing people research doesn't work, you wrote about some things that really help. What are the principles that we use about what works? I told you before that it's about learning. You need to help people learn in this complex system of the climate. 3 key tools. And want to read more about this? If you could send the link, Caroline, to everybody. The 5th Discipline is my favorite book on this topic about these 3 areas. And Peter Senge, another mentor of ours, he was actually one of the people who encouraged us to found Climate Interactive back around, 2003, 2004, Peter Senge did. He said, focus on 3 legs of this learning stool. Reflective conversation, creating a space where people are open to being wrong, changing their mind. It's very hard to do. We'll talk about how to do it. Vision, helping people see the future they really want, be honest about the world that is, and then close the gap between the two, tapping into what they really care about. And then systems thinking, seeing the interdependencies, the delays, the feedback processes in complex systems. I'm going to talk about each of those 3. So the first one is about vision. In this climate movement, our position is that we talk most of the time about how bad the world will be if we don't take enough action. We really have people focused on avoiding a negative vision. That's not motivational. That's not exciting. Martin Luther King Jr. did not say, I have a nightmare, here's how bad it is. He had a dream. Now, mind you, we have to be honest about the world as it is and complement that with the vision. So cultivate a desirable vision of success on people's own terms. Help them always create a scenario in the model of 2 degrees or below that. Even if you do a negotiation and it only gets to 2.6, say, oh, well, let's see what it would take and move the levers that show here's what it would take. So help them create their own scenario of success. Take that 60 seconds that I talked about in the workshop of silence and really have people think about, here's what it would mean to me to be part of a world that was on track to make this happen. You're having people fall in love with their dreams. We're going to have to be in love with our dreams in order to work as hard as we're going to have to work to make this happen. Give people the chance to advocate for that dream. And here's what it looks like. So, and take a picture of them. Here's Bill Nye the Science Guy. When I ran the scenario with him, I said, hey, can we take a picture of you? And here's his vision. Puts it out into the world. Lisa Blunt Rochester, a member of the House of Representatives, with her vision. People want to be around winning. And here you get to show a scenario where we win. This is at HSBC. Folks, 2 degree scenario. Take a picture with it. Have them all post it to their social media. Of course, there's a button in the corner, share your scenario, post it to Twitter, put it out into the world. Here's my vision. Here's the world that I really want to see. Write about it. Say what you love about it. See if we can enroll everybody in excitement about a positive scenario where we avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Okay, that's the aspirational side of this. Okay, I'm going to slow down. I know I'm so intense about this. So the hard work of working with this area, and we call it personal mastery is the other jargon. There's a book by Robert Fritz where he talks about personal mastery, is holding the tension between that vision and the current reality of the world that we actually have. And here I'm going to defer, instead of talking about it in my own terms, I'm going to defer to what Dana Meadows, my mentor who taught us about this, wrote. And after reading it, Caroline, would you send people the link to this? It's just a beautiful words of her. She died in 2001. She had just won a MacArthur Genius Award. Here's what she said. When I feel overwhelmed, hold on a second, I'm going to move to that, get all discombobulated when I read this stuff. I'm going to turn off the camera. Just listen to Dana. When I feel overwhelmed by the agony of being a caring person on this beleaguered planet, I like to feel and remember a demonstration I once saw at a workshop. Imagine for a minute that you're holding on to the ends of a thick rubber band, one end in each hand. Now picture pulling one hand up, one down, so the band is stretched tight. Pull hard. Hold that tension there for a minute and let your lower hand represent reality, the state of the world right now, the whole human and planetary condition. Not good in many ways for many people, not good for the other creatures of Earth. Your upper hand represents utopia, the way the world would be if everything worked right, if all creatures and the Earth as a whole were healthy and cared for. If your imaginary rubber band is thick enough and your hands far apart enough, the tension is probably getting to you by now. What you want to do most is to let go. So let go with your upper hand. Snap. Ouch. Forget about utopia, dreams, and visions. You're a realist, a fashionable cynic. The rubber band flops around directionless in your lower hand. You're well grounded, fully aware of the trouble and toil of today. But you have no clear direction to go and no hope of getting anywhere. If you let go with your lower hand instead, the rubber band will flop again, hanging from above, totally out of touch with the facts. You're a flake. You live in fantasy, in the happy supposition that everything is all right, or will soon be so, or that you need to apply no effective power to change anything. You're a Pollyanna, unconvincing to others, because in truth, you haven't even convinced yourself. You know you've let go of reality. In either of these tensionless states, you are quite comfortable and quite powerless. The only alternative is to bear the tension. Hold on tight, firmly in touch with reality, unshakably committed to your highest dreams. Feel the pain. Summon your strength over and over to endure it. Stop to rest if you have to, but pick up both ends again. Only out of acceptance of the world's terrible pain and its wonderful possibilities can you anchor your upper hand division while you discover ways to bring your lower hand, the reality closest to you, up toward that vision, slowly, slowly. Your anguish, sometimes so unbearable, is in fact the force through which you can help the world come a little closer to being all that it can be. Okay, that's 1989, a letter, anguish, and a rubber band. That's the hardest work. I told you some of the most important work. This is the hardest, is helping people and ourselves stay in that sweet spot. No, it's not going to be easy. We don't have it figured out. Up at the top. No, we're not screwed. How to keep us engaged, seeing the possibility for closing the gap and having the strength to hold that tension. Dana wrote really well about that and lived that in her life. Okay, that's not what this is about. So in this work of vision, this is a metaphor I want you to practice and think about. Okay. The next area, the second leg of the stool. The first one was vision. The second one is reflective conversation. And the idea of reflective conversation is, can we have conversation in ways that help people reflect on their own thinking and their experience with this simulator and talking to other people and frameworks like multi-solving in ways that have them change their mind? It's really hard to create the conditions where people change their mind. How do you do it? Well, the first is that you need to explicitly create a playful virtual world, a what-if world. And you'll notice the way that we tend to play with the model. We'll say, well, what if? What if we grew a lot of trees? What if we had a lot of carbon dioxide pulled out of the atmosphere from blah, blah, blah? What if we had a lot of wind and solar? It's somewhat playful because you want people to just imagine what would happen if, and then learn what it would take. Now, it's playful and it sounds like it's kind of light or not serious. You are gravely serious about this issue. No doubt about that. You are gravely serious about the rigor, the scientific rigor required to do these kind of experiments and the kind of testing of the model and the kind of hard work it takes to build a model like this. But when you use it, you need to have some levity. Otherwise, people treat it too literally. Like you were saying, this is the world. This is where things are headed. And that is not a world where people can learn in. Create a playful what-if world. What you really need to do along the way is, as a first thing, surface assumptions. So often, people aren't open to changing their mind because people don't even recognize that they have a mind to change. They don't realize that the reality that we've created is manufactured. We have a set of assumptions that shape how we see the world. And until we recognize that we're just assuming certain things, we're not going to change any of our assumptions or any of our thinking. That is why we always ask people to run their mental model. So the very first thing you'll do is like, okay, you pull up the model and someone will say, well, what if we have less coal? And you'll say, okay, what's gonna move in the model? And you'll ask them to think about which line, the brown line, yeah, that'll go down. Well, what's gonna compensate? What's gonna happen in natural gas? And have them think. And what they're gonna do is start noticing that they have a mental model. They have a way that they're seeing the world. And they're gonna see that maybe they're open to changing it. That's what we call learning, improving their mental models. So help people surface assumptions and then lovingly and gently but firmly help them improve those mental models in light of what you're learning from the computer model. Get yourself out of the way. Sometimes you're going to think, oh, I'm studying this model, I'm going to explain it to them, and it's, I don't know, a test of your effectiveness as a leader or your excellence with the simulator. That's not the point. You are just trying to have the person have an effective interaction with a tool that grounds them in the science. They're going to think, they're going to come into this thing and think, oh, if we just all ate vegetarian, that's 50% of emissions, right? So temperature should go down from 4 to 3. That's half the way. How to have those words get tested in a computer model and fed back to them in a way that they're actually changing their mind. That's what you want. And you're just helping that happen. Help them check their thinking, facilitate that process, get out of the middle of it. It doesn't really matter who you are or what you bring to this or how good a job in some ways you do. Get out of the way. In the same way though, yes, you want to have the model part of this, but not really. The point of this is not En-ROADS. It's not the model. The point of this whole experience is to have someone see a world that they want and to choose, here's an action that I can take to address it. So if the power goes out and you can't talk to anybody using the model, or the model doesn't work, or you forget about how the model works, the basics of the En-ROADS Climate Workshop is, welcome everybody. What do you want to see in the world? Where do you think we're headed now? What would you love about getting to the world that you would love? And what are you going to do about it? Pretty simple. That is the core of what you're taking them through. And that last question is the most important. Hey, what do you think we should do about this? What could you do? What would be an action that you could take? That's the most important thing. So when in doubt, get the model out of the way. Have a good conversation about what we're going to do. Along the way, it's fun and it's necessary for learning to let go of control. If people think you're just guiding them through something, they're not going to change their mind much. But if you really do say, hey, I've got 18 levers here, what do you want to try? And are open to things that people say or combinations that you've never seen, it's terrifying as a facilitator. People will say, well, what if you do 1, 2, 3 together? You know, what if we have afforestation, electrification, and a carbon price? And I'm like, oh, I've never done those 3 together. It's scary, but we've tested the model. It's going to be okay. But the point is, let go of control. If people feel that they're in control of the process, they're more willing to changing their mind about things. Along the way, give them the simulator to play with if you can. Many people really enjoy that, and it helps them learn on their own terms. Walk the talk. I'm not talking about light bulbs here. It's really important along the way that you be a fellow traveler in your curiosity, your openness to changing your mind, and your willingness to learn. Peter Senge pressed us, 20 years ago, he pressed me on this. Completely committed, completely uncertain, completely committed to results, completely committed that what comes out of your mouth is what you mean, completely committed that the conclusions that you've drawn, you think you have the best available thinking that has gotten you there. However, completely uncertain. You're open to changing your mind if there's evidence presented to you that is worthy of you changing your mind. Don't fall into, if you choose this learning path. Now, if you're a political messenger in the world and you're building billboards, this is not how to behave if you're all about billboards, you know, making just like keep it in the ground. That is, you don't want to express uncertainty about that if you're making billboards and slogans. However, if you're engaging colleagues and other people to learn together, you need to be completely uncertain, open to changing your mind, to learn together. Okay, but I also wrote bold, courageous, subversive. Subversive, as in finding ways to change culture. We're asking ourselves to really, to get to 2 degrees, we would have to undo so much about global society, where we get our energy, where we get our food, how capitalism works, if capitalism is how this is going to happen, how laws work, how we relate to people who are more vulnerable to these impacts than we are. Deep assumptions about how we've contributed to these problems. Those are the kinds of changes, as you've seen, that it takes. If that's the case, it would take a lot of major changes in society. So stir the pot, do different things. You have to be the kind of person who can be a little bit in their face about this. Don't be a jerk, but things that are very different from how people normally interact. I'm hollering at the green dot more than is socially appropriate. I want to show that we're going to have to need to try different things. 60 seconds of silence is not how people behave in workshops. The role playing where people climb up on tables or interrupt each other in the game, that's not how people behave. But we're practicing. We're trying things that are subversive, that are very different ways of thinking and behaving in the world. Demonstrate your openness to being bold, courageous, and subversive. Okay, the third leg of the stool, systems thinking. Oh my God, the interdependencies in the model. How cool are they? Isn't it cool the way that this system behaves? The way, like the squeeze the balloon problem you saw that we showed a couple weeks ago? You get less coal, more gas, the way those respond off of each other, the way the carbon price affects so much in the energy system and energy demand, how these things are tightly coupled, how in multi-solving, actions that help the climate also help justice, air quality, health, finances of people. The interrelationships, the intersectionality of this issue is fascinating. Notice them, point them out, let people discover them. Okay, the goal of this work is to compress time and space. The model helps you see what would the world look like in 2085 if we took these actions. That is a huge gift. Help people experience the future. This is one way to address intergenerational justice. How to make sure that we're taking care of the vulnerable people who will be alive in 65 years. Compress time and space with the model. Along the way, when people say stuff that's wrong, correct them. It's tempting as a facilitator to kind of say, oh, that's a great idea, yay. But if the red line goes down for oil and you say, well, why did the red line go down for oil? And someone says, that's because we ran out of oil, but you know it's because we got more efficient, say, no. It is possible that in scenarios we could run out of oil. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that we're investing in energy efficiency of transport, and that is reducing the demand for oil, so oil goes down. Correct sloppy thinking with vigor, with a smile, with love and patience, but definitely uses the time to correct sloppy thinking. Always take the time to explain why the model does what it does. Otherwise, this is a black box model. A black box model gives you the result. The answer to why did the model do that is because we're really smart and the model's great. That is not the answer that you give. You're going to explain why the model does what it does to improve their mental model. And if you improve their mental model, they don't need the simulator anymore, which is great. They're walking around with the simulator between their ears. Their mental model has improved. So as you do this, never say because the model says so. Instead, first study why the model does what it does, and then help them understand why the model does what it does. Never say this phrase. Along the way, it's tempting to use non-scientific language about the model. However, here's some yeses and nos when it comes to how you talk about it. Don't say the model proves. No, it suggests. Don't say the model forecasts or we predict. Instead, we're creating a scenario. This isn't a forecast model. There are other models that have the purpose of saying, here's where we think things are going. What we're doing is that here's a reasonable future grounded in the science. Excuse me, I'm gonna look and make sure no one on my team is texting me. All right, that's not you guys. We're saying here is a reasonable scenario against which to test other actions that could be taken. It is calibrated and grounded in the best available science of all of these other models of what they think is the baseline scenario. So that's how we think about it, as opposed to here is our prediction, here is our forecast. We don't say the model is right. No model is right. It's appropriate to its purpose. The model isn't validated. That's too strong. We've built confidence. Why are we confident in the model? And in a week, we're going to tell you why we are so incredibly confident in this model. And that's going to be with the model testing and calibration webinar that's next Thursday. And there are a whole family of models out there, particularly the integrated assessment models. They're the general circulation models, and they're great. We need them. We are different. We are here to complement those other models because the world needs a model oriented towards folks like you, to decision makers who want to have a fast running model that they can test scenarios in. We're not better, we're different and appropriate to our purpose, and we complement those other models. Here's some other suggestions about answering questions. This will come up a lot when people go to you. The first is, of course, brief and clear. That's a good life skill overall. You will have somebody in your sessions with an agenda. They did not come to follow the steps that you're leading people through of, hey, let's create a 2-degree scenario. What would you love about it? What are you going to do about it? They want to share an idea that they have, which is fine. They, I don't know, love the idea of solar roadways. They're doing a fundraiser so that your town gets one, and they're looking for a spot to make their speech about the fundraiser for the solar roadways. And you want to give a space to people. You don't want to shut them down too fast. But at some point, and I've done it dozens of times, you need to shut people down, and because they will go on and on and on. So what you can often do, and what I often do, is often walk towards the person, listen, and when it seems like they've made their point, but they're going to keep going, you can summarize and see if you can ask a question that brings it back to the flow of the session. So someone will be, so you'll say something like, so what I understand is there's a new technology around solar roadways, and in this town there's actually a fundraiser in order to get people to go to it and to raise money for this possibly interesting climate solution. So what do you think are the implications for the question at hand, which is, what could be a policy that would address coal? And the person could say, well, I thought that the solar roadway could address coal. And you'd say, great, yes, it could. Let's go test it in the model. Go back, keep things rolling. So acknowledge, take the high road, but it is, these are some techniques you can use when you run into this situation, which you will. Now, a different kind of challenging situation in answering questions is when someone's really challenging you, and they won't ask us a question that sounds like, hi, I don't believe you, or hi, I don't like your conclusion, which is what is really behind things sometimes. Or I'm open to your conclusions, but I want to test to see if you really know what you're talking about. Because if you don't know what you're talking about, I'm not going to believe you. So I'm going to ask you something that I think is really hard and see how you handle it. So those are the kinds of things that you're gonna get, or you could get. I've gotten them hundreds of times. So the key thing is always take the high road. Don't tell people like that I suspect you think, you're challenging me for the wrong reason. Don't get suspicious in the group. Take the high road. Do use the 5-point memorized En-ROADS climate speech that I've shared in several times. I'll share it again. That we built En-ROADS with MIT Sloan using the best available science with data from the IPCC, the EIA, the IEN, and the place. We calibrated these models. Everything's in the reference guide, 400-page reference guide. You can change the assumptions. You know that slide. I've showed it to you a lot. Memorize those, say them clearly, and that'll help. But and this is why this is the advanced facilitation. Sometimes you can use these moments of challenging to go to a deeper place with people if you think it's appropriate. I remember one time a guy, and it's usually a guy, by the way, said, "What was your assumption for the progress ratio for nuclear? Because blah, 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 blah." And he was hammering on it. And I just knew something else was up. And I just took a risk. And I said, John, his name was John, I said, "John, I can tell you more about nuclear, but I just got a name. I'm getting the feeling that there's something else about this that's really on your mind that you want to say." And it took him, and he was kind of surprised that I said it. And he said, "I'm just mad about you scientists saying you think you got it all figured out. Well, you don't." And that just like a breath of air, like, oh, we're actually talking about what we're talking about, like what really matters to people. And other people are like so happy to hear that we finally heard what John was upset about. And another time I did this with someone, and he climbed over a table and gave me a hug and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just really passionate about this." So sometimes it helps to get curious about unvoiced feelings and what's going on. Don't try this the first time, but you may want to try it. And it's funny, sometimes these people who challenge you the most turn out to be your best advocates. It's amazing how often that actually happens. Okay, all right. So there was another phrase from Dana Meadows, our mentor. If you want someone to walk out the front door, first you got to close all the back doors. In this context, the back doors are the things that are holding someone back from taking action on the hard work of addressing this challenge of climate equity and justice. We know there's some hard solutions. The world is trying to offer us, in many ways, easier ones. So a lot of your work may be what she called closing back doors. And I call it like the dance of the yes, but. Someone will say, yeah, I see that we need to keep coal, oil, and gas in the ground early and take action soon, but maybe your simulator is overly pessimistic. And you may need to show again how we've calibrated the model, and it's pretty consistent with the other models. And actually, Janet on the call right now, we just wrote an FAQ on this exact topic for both coal and for renewables. So you may need to equip yourself with answering why it's not. And then someone will say, well, we don't need to take the action that you're saying because, well, your simulator, it probably uses faulty assumptions. And there you can say, well, change the assumptions and see, is the conclusion robust under a range of assumptions? You can try it yourself. But maybe not you, but other scientists got it wrong. And of course, you can say that 97% of the scientists agree that humans cause climate change and climate change is real, and on and on. If you want to go there, it's best not to spend too much time on it, but you'll find that you may get into this dance some. And so these answers sometimes can help. They're also going to say maybe there is a silver bullet, whether it's someone saying, oh, all we need is a carbon price. No, that's not the case. All we need is afforestation. No, that's not the case. All we need is to eat vegetarian. As you know, the model shows that it takes many seeds to plant a garden. You can't assert that. You need to give them experience of seeing that. So what you're doing is closing all of these back doors, helping people on their own terms to close it. That's some of the advanced work that you may get into with the simulator, really at an advanced level, on and on. Okay, those are the big three pillars of systems thinking, vision, reflective conversation. You're going to learn a lot also from each other in your own experience of facilitating. We invite you to go to the forum where there are many ambassadors, other people who are being trained, communicating with each other about, I found this situation, here's what I did, or ask each other other questions. So Caroline, can you send that link to people of how they can go to the forum? That's a really good place to learn more from each other. That said, you have now taken, almost finished 7 of 8. Soon you have the opportunity to become what we call an En-ROADS Climate Ambassador. You'd finish these webinars, read the materials that you need to read, watch some videos of other people leading the workshop. Maybe you've done that already. Lead 2 sessions, register them on the website and put the sessions on the map. Get feedback from 5 people and have them ask them, how can I make this better? What were the high points? What were the low points? Tell us that you're going to register all of your events. Take a test. The test isn't a pass-fail test. It is basically a learning test. And then you fill out a form to become an En-ROADS Climate Ambassador. So I'm going to go and show you where all that information is. So here's the En-ROADS Climate Workshop and the training program. So these are those steps that you just saw. If you become a En-ROADS Climate Ambassador, here they are. Here they are around the world. Join this group of people who are using En-ROADS to make a big difference around the world using this tool. And register your event, register yourself as an ambassador on this page that lays out everything that you do, shows you all the materials that are available, and then at the bottom here, it's a simple application. You basically says who you are, where you are, etc., where sector you come from. Take the time to do that. Join this group of people. We'd love to hear about your experiences. There are other tools that we give you, like this facilitator feedback form that you can give to your people and send it to them and have them fill it out to give you some feedback. And you get this fancy, pretty certificate of participation that you can brag about on your LinkedIn page. So even though you're not done with the webinars, here's your homework. Engage a friend with the simulator. One person, someone in your family, someone in your pod, someone in your community you can meet over Zoom or GoToWebinar or something. Take a picture, post it, #En-ROADS, or email it to us at support@climateinteractive.org. We'd love to see what you did. As we showed earlier, you've been sending the pictures. Think about this team here. We sit here staring at these laptops, dreaming that there are people out there using these tools. It is such a wonderful moment, isn't it, Caroline and Janet? When we get these pictures, we just love seeing your faces and you using these tools to make a difference out in the world. Please send us the pictures. I go to En-ROADS, I search En-ROADS on Twitter every day to see who's posted something. Please take the time to do it. So overall, I hope here's the journey we've taken today. We have a tool, but it's really not about the tool of En-ROADS. Instead, what we're doing is giving you a process, a method, and some tools to help people see the world that they really want, get honest about the world that is, and orient themselves towards closing that gap, to bringing their dreams into being. Along the way, you get the opportunity to love somebody so much that you're investing in them and their kind of achievement in their life. They get to become the person that they really want to be as a leader on climate justice and equity. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. Go get them, everybody. All right, we're going to stick around now. If you'd like to stay, if you'd like to go, we understand. But if you'd like to stick around, we're going to answer some of your questions. And let me just get a breath. Wow. We're going to answer some of your questions now. So Caroline, any that you see that, and if you have questions, so go to the question box and ask particularly your facilitation questions. Many of you out there have had a chance to share this with somebody or have some thoughts about what might work or what might not work. What are your questions about advanced facilitation? Caroline, what's one that you see?
We've got a lot of great questions coming in. Someone was wondering if there's a way to use the rubber band metaphor within a workshop, or holding
Oh
the
yeah.
creative tension idea in a
Oh
workshop.
yeah. Oh yeah. So yes. So can you use this in a workshop? I've done it many, many times. What do you do? And I got to see if I brought it. I usually carry here in my bag a oops, an actual rubber band. I don't see that I have it right here. So introduce it in a workshop. So perhaps in the middle, when somebody will say, you know, you'll be running scenarios and it looks so hard, and someone will say, oh my God, they'll groan. And you'll say, ask them, well, what's going on? And they're like, oh my God, we just had renewables around the world and it only cut the temperature by 0.4 degrees. Oh, this is so hard. They'll say, we're screwed. And you'll see them going to that point of just the lower, focusing on the current reality. Or someone will say, oh, solar roadways are around the corner. All we need to do is eat vegetarian. And that's like the top of it. And you'll say, you know what? Let's not go either direction here. I'm going to ask you to hold the tension. Then go print this out and read them. It's beautiful. Like I printed out Dana's article, or just read it and explain to them, here's the idea of the rubber band, and challenge people to hold the tension. So use it. Absolutely. It works great. Other questions?
Great. Yeah, great. Thanks. Earlier you mentioned the notion of underselling the simulator. Are there
Yeah.
any risks that people should be wary of when taking this approach?
Is there a risk to underselling the simulator? Yes. Like, don't undersell it too much. You know, like don't say, oh, it's not important, it's not relevant. Yeah, it's finding that. So that's the biggest risk, is if you say that too strongly, then people are like, well, why are you inviting me here? What's the big deal? I thought you said this was great. It's don't undersell it too much. What you've got to do is undersell the relevance to the exact situation. It's going to inform what we do here in our company, here in our community. It's not going to solve our problems for us, but it's really cool. Let's try it. It's a good exercise that teaches some systems thinking principles, and a lot of people have used it around the world. It's been really effective. Others?
Great, thanks. People are wondering, is there a place where I can get advice on how to run an event remotely? Much of the advice I'm hearing works best face-to-face. And I think I'll answer this really quickly. We're going to be sending out a follow-up email, as we've mentioned earlier. And actually within that, we are including a couple of helpful resources that we've developed for running events online specifically. So this includes 2 kind of overview manuals of walking through how to run both the game and the workshop online, and also a previous webinar we ran about how to engage people virtually through our events. So we have a lot of resources there, and they'll be following up with you. Another question is, can you revisit the concept of what's the difference between using the word scenario or a prediction based on a certain hypothesis, and why it's important to watch language there?
Okay, thank you. Prediction versus scenario. So a prediction would be, here is what I think the world is going to look like over the next 80 years. Here is our forecast of coal, oil, gas, renewables. So that is a forecast model that is trying to say the most likely future is this. And a scenario is a set of assumptions that you're going to test and see how do they play out over time. So when you're doing a scenario, it's like, well, let's imagine a world where thorium fission were half the price of coal and competed with coal, and after a delay of 10 years, showed up in the market. How would that play out? So that would be, well, we ran a scenario where that happened, and here's what we saw. And that would be a scenario that's created. You're not saying, I think this is going to happen. I think we're going to get thorium fission in this year. It is, given these assumptions, here's how it would play out. That's the key distinction. Predicting the future versus putting together a set of assumptions and then being curious about what their impact would be. Other questions?
Yes, one second. So someone was wondering, would you ever advise doing a brief 10-minute introduction to systems thinking at the start of an event?
Would I ever advise doing a systems thinking introduction? So the short version is always show the model within 10 minutes if you're going to use the model in it because it's so engaging. I would advocate against teaching people about systems thinking before getting into it, except if it was really brief. Oftentimes, with people who seem into, like, say, a systems thinking framing, I will show our elephant, the blind men and the elephant cartoon, and use it as a systems thinking story, which is use a cartoon or something light to say, hey, we need to see all parts of the system, don't we? Yeah, we sure do. Okay, that's what we're going to do today. So that's a good introduction about the idea of systems thinking. But the best use of systems thinking training is what we often do, which is to explain why the model does what it does. So when you have a counterintuitive result, when you've encouraged renewables and energy prices went down and so demand went up and there's a rebound effect, draw the balancing loop of price and demand, which is the rebound effect. Use it to illuminate what's going on in the model and explain counterintuitive behavior. That's a really effective place. But don't get too wrapped up in much teaching and intellectualizing. Get them involved in creating alternative futures early on. Use the tools to help them understand. Unless you have students and you have them for like weeks and then you can give them lectures. Like when I have my MBA students, I teach them a lot about systems thinking before showing them this model because I have them for weeks and that's different.
Great, thank you. Danella Meadows also pointed out leverage points in a system and identified mental models as key leverage points. How are we addressing mental models with, or when we consider advanced facilitation?
Ooh, fantastic. So, and oh, this is a good, Caroline, remind me, and we can send this. There's a paper called Leverage Points, Places to Intervene in a System. One of her most famous essays. It's in that book, Thinking in Systems, and she laid out high leverage and low leverage interventions. She talked about intervening with mental models and as a particularly high leverage action in the world. And I think maybe I know Caroline and Janet, you just saw this several hours ago. We were talking about this exact idea when we were talking about deeply held assumptions and really how to respond to all that's going on with the protests that are going on in the world and COVID-19 in this context. So her idea was the iceberg. And I've shown you this before here, that if you want to move an iceberg, don't focus on the events, focus here on systemic structure, mindsets, and mental models. That's another word we could have put down here at the bottom. So we use the workshop to question deeply held mental models and mindsets in the exact way that Dana was talking about. So if you can see people naming them and questioning them, then bring them up and say, does this serve us? What are the kind of ones that show up in the model? All growth is good. We're seeing the challenge of a growing population, growing industrialization. There's this belief that all growth is good because we need growth. Well, we're seeing the challenge of that if you push up against planetary limits. So that's like one mental model. Another mental model, technology will save everything. The answer to this is going to be a new technology. If you play with En-ROADS enough, you will see how that is not the case. And so you're not just going to say, oh, thorium fission may not be so great. You can name it as and see are there deeply held assumptions about the fixes to climate change that we should question? Like technology will solve all of our problems. So how do you bring them up? Name them and give a chance for people to voice them. One exercise that I've done in the En-ROADS Climate Workshop, and Janet and Caroline, I don't think I've even mentioned this with you guys. What we've often done is at the end of it, when we have the time, I'll say, okay, everybody, write down on a piece of paper, 3 or 4, what are deeply held assumptions or beliefs that would help us advance the scenario we just created in En-ROADS. What are deeply held mental models, beliefs, assumptions? We can change the world. Not all growth serves everybody. We can care for vulnerable people. Natural systems have a large role in healing the earth and creating sustainability. Many of the issues that we care about are intersectional, that these things are all tied together. Racial injustice, sexism, white supremacy, these things are wrapped up in climate injustice. So people will say things like that. And then what we'll do is we'll write them on a board. And then another board, what are the mental models, assumptions, beliefs, mindsets that are holding us back? Which is, people will say, they'll write down 3 or 4 and you write them up there. It's like, well, governments can't work together around the world to solve big problems. People are inherently selfish and will never help out other people. We can trust the people in power to handle all of these things. All we need is X. There is a silver bullet that will solve this problem. We just need to search for the right one. So that's an exercise you can try. Write down all of the beliefs that they think will help us get there. What are the ones holding back? And it's interesting, we'll go around and have people read all of them out loud. It's a really interesting exercise. Boy, that was a long answer, Caroline. Other questions?
Yeah, sometimes participants ask very technical questions of how the scenario is modeled, coefficients, carbon intensity, etc. Such questions distract the audience from the main goal of the session. How do we address such questions on technicality of the model?
Yeah. Yeah, so this goes back to that theme of when people are challenging you, and they'll ask those questions. They're not really asking about that. They want to test you, or they're uncomfortable about something. They want to just push it into these areas of details in the model. And again, I'll come back to the basics, which are that, do your best to explain what you understand about whatever the topic is that they do bring up. Offer, and you can go to the model and know your way around graphs to see, can you figure out what is going on and perhaps shed some light on it, because they may be asking about nuclear or this or that. And you can go look at the nuclear section in the model and see what it shows. Also, you can guide people and say, well, you can look together. I'm going to pull up the En-ROADS model. So the resources here in this corner of, I just mentioned nuclear, guide them to the I button and say, well, you can go and look and read about all the assumptions here about what's underneath. But at some point you may need to say, well, of course, I'm but one person and there is nobody, not even Janet, Caroline, me, and Lori Siegel, who built the darn model, or John Sturman, who understands the whole thing. So you get to have some playful modesty about it and say, well, of course I can't memorize the whole model, but it's all laid out here. And the 389-page reference guide is laid out there if you want to look more deeply. So some combination of those answers, as well as the 5-point answer that I gave you before, can really help. And sometimes you just need to say, well, that's a part of the model I don't really understand, but I trust that this was built using best available science. So let's keep on moving, and here we go.
Great, thanks, Drew. Can you speak some more about techniques to diffuse someone who is being aggressive and turn it around in a moment of compassion and learning, noting that the scenario is particularly common for female and minority teachers.
Wow. Someone who's, I'm gonna make sure I'm getting this, someone who's being aggressive in a moment where what the facilitator thinks is needed is some compassion and gentleness. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, I think what they might be referring to is if someone is maybe disrespecting them or questioning the lessons being brought to the table, they might respond aggressively. And how can we, as facilitators, diffuse that and also turn it into a productive moment of compassion and learning?
Wow.
What's the best way to diffuse someone who's being confrontational or angry or dismissive of the science or things like that?
Okay, thank you. What a great question. So the best way that I have found through the years, and this is something I learned from Sarah Schley, was my teacher on this one, is that in those moments, you remember those 4 ways of being I mentioned before? This is a fellow traveler moment. And what you do is you just name your experience in the moment without judgment. You know, you're going along and you're saying, oh, we're testing this or this, and you get confronted in some way, and you name what you're feeling, what you're seeing, and what it's leading you to feel. And so it's just good to get your thoughts and say, well, you know, someone says, I don't know, they said they hollered at you, like, how could you believe that? You know, you're just being, you know, how could you believe that, with an aggressive tone? Like, just to name it, like, so you just said, how could you believe that? And I'm having this moment of some sadness that in the tone that I just heard. I just feel sad that your voice sounds louder than most people are using here. And frankly, I don't know what to say. Be vulnerable. It's just like being vulnerable and naming the moment. And you're thinking, I kind of want to get back to the topic. We were talking about coal, but the way that you're speaking, I feel I need to address that tone is just bringing this out of me. And then maybe look to others and say, well, anyone else hearing this differently? How are you feeling? Or so it's being transparent with your thought process of what's going on inside of you. Like, there's a side of me that wants to just take charge because I'm facilitating this and tell you to sit down, but that's kind of rude. And you seem to have something you're really passionate about. I'd love to know what it is, but I'm still just getting stuck with this moment. I just feel terrible. Yeah. So name your experience of the moment without judgment. This is what I'm experiencing. This is how I'm feeling. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to come back at them with anything. And what you'll find usually is some sort of magic. It's amazing the way that when you shift into being truly vulnerable, and this is getting me all vulnerable because I've been there so many times, people will be like your friend and your ally. And sometimes the person will diffuse, somebody will join you and say, yeah, well, what's that about? Why are you talking that way? Or that's what I recommend, is getting vulnerable by explaining your exact experience of what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and how it feels. And what you're thinking of doing, maybe naming the 3 options that you're thinking of doing, but you don't know what to do and you're stuck. That's what works. It's if you see someone doing it in a room, I don't know if you've ever witnessed this, it's amazing. If you can bring that kind of vulnerability to it, it diffuses things in a powerful way.
Great, thanks, Drew. And just noting the time, I'll make a quick comment here. Thank you everyone for joining us. And we're going to be sending a follow-up email as mentioned earlier. If we didn't answer any of your questions, be sure to check out some of our resources such as the forums or our support@climateinteractive.org email address can be used to contact us. And all of the links that you might have missed today or any other resources will be included in this email. And maybe, Drew, we can do one more question before we wrap up.
Great.
So one last question is, What advice would you give to someone who is interested in inviting someone not involved in climate work and convincing them to join a workshop and actually give their, true quality time and be present during the session?
Yeah. So someone who's not involved in climate work, I'll give two answers. The game that we've designed is particularly set up for people who are new, because they don't have to say, raise their hand and say, oh, I want to see afforestation. They don't have to know a good bit to be involved. They're in a team. The team gets together with a piece of paper and you play a role. And that is easier for people who aren't as engaged. However, if you're running a workshop or you're just sitting down with somebody and they haven't been engaged in this, they're gonna know the words climate change and they're gonna have understood enough of that, and you can frame it in very, very simply, which is, you've probably heard of this thing that people are trying to prevent called climate change, and it's really here, point to the simulator. It's about getting temperature down. There's this goal where right now we're headed at 4 degrees. The goal is to get it to 2. We're gonna play a game. Move the levers at the bottom. Which of these 18 things should we do to get that 4 down to 2? That's the game. Play with me. Period. And then they'll click on something, electrification. What's that? Oh, that's Elon Musk's Tesla and the other 25 kind of electric cars. And do you think that's going to help? And then you're in a conversation. So frame it as a game, something simple. They've heard of climate change. Don't make a big deal out of saving the world. Sometimes you just, let's play a game. And some people get really intrigued by that. That's what I do with the 5th, 6th, and 7th graders I've done this with. That's a simple way. All right, so I think that was our last one, didn't you say? And boy, go run it with somebody. Take a picture. Send us the picture. Register on the online site. And we believe in you. Go get them. Go get them. Goodbye.